Derby. If anybody's seen my driving record, you know I am well prepared for this night. I am so ready to get down to the people of Rifle and Garfield County. Come out and see us. It's going to be a great time. God bless America.
I'd like to start by recognizing a Postal Service letter carrier in my district named B. Lee. For 38 years, B has connected constituents to their essential medicines, ballots, notes from loved ones. With so many hospitals and medical offices on her route, she is proud that her work helps keep our communities healthy and safe. As we discuss ways to improve the federal workforce, I want us all to remember that federal employees are dedicated public servants and valued members of our communities. I thank my constituent B for her years of service to Orange County. Second, I want to take up a partial response to what my colleague, Ms. Boebert, was discussing. VPN, she mentioned an article alleging that 25% of HHS employees did not actually telework. And I just want to flag for everyone here that VPN, and using VPN login as a way to measure employee engagement and productivity is notoriously inaccurate and misleading. It does not necessarily reflect an employee's access to their email, the internet. They can be working on Microsoft Word, drafting a document. They can be in Excel, inputting data without being connected to the internet at all, much less to VPN. It also fails to reflect the work of the thousands of doctors, researchers, scientists, and other HHS employees who spend much of their time working in the field, not logged onto a computer. I now like to turn to an area that I've worked on before, which is...
Would my colleague just real quick re-yield?
Real quick.
Yeah, I'm not even sure if VPN is required,
Correct.
by the way. Thank you.
Correct. I want to turn to an issue I've worked on before, which is wildland firefighter classification. We know that wildfire in California get worse and worse each year. We don't even talk about a season anymore. It's an all-year-round risk. And we owe our wildland firefighters debts of gratitude for what they do. Director, would you agree that achieving equity across the wildland firefighter workforce is an important goal?
Absolutely, Congresswoman.
So we should expect that wildland firefighters who do the same work to have the same job descriptions, pay, benefits, et cetera. Would you agree?
Yes, I would.
Okay, so as you know, the bipartisan infrastructure law directed coordination between OPM and the Departments of Interior and Agriculture on developing a distinct job series for federal wildland firefighters. And the goal here is to accurately describe their duties and what they should be paid for the hard work that they do. Last June, OPM issued guidance for developing this job series, which includes employees in the Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management, Fish and Wildlife, Bureau of Indian Affairs, and National Park Service, 5 agencies. Is OPM facilitating interagency coordination on this classification process to make sure that it's completed properly and fairly?
Thank you, Congresswoman. We helped with the, like you mentioned, the job series, and now we're working through the classification, the occupation series, and now working through the classification aspect of it.
And you feel that OPM is would you characterize your role here as hands-on in helping the agencies come to consistent descriptions?
Absolutely. We do see that as our role to ensure continuity. We also want to make sure that we see as our role to ensure there's a career path and trajectory for firefighters.
Wonderful, because we don't want the U.S. Forest Service to end up short of people because BLM has a different classification. We want all of these agencies to have the ability to have trained and skilled wildland firefighters to keep us all safe. Can you talk a little bit about whether you have worked with federal wildland firefighters directly to get their input to make sure that what the agencies are doing, what those in Washington or field offices might be doing, matches what's happening on the ground, the challenges that our firefighters are facing?
Absolutely, Congresswoman. We have what I would hope is a good relationship with the associations and unions that support the firefighters. I had the opportunity to meet them in person and hear firsthand about just some really challenging stories about how they're managing just their livelihood with the current pay. And so we want to ensure, as a part of our role, not only this occupation, but to ensure that the pay is a permanent feature that's now through the BIL, but will expire soon.
Wonderful. I just want to encourage OPM to continue taking a leadership role so that we don't have agencies acting kind of independently and leave the wildland firefighters with the short end of the stick here. I want to use my remaining time. Has OPM, we hear so much about the costs of federal employees, the costs of their wages, the costs of their benefits. Has OPM formally studied the costs of recruiting and training for when employees leave? Can we weigh the cost of paying an existing trained, qualified, excellent employee, which we hear a lot about? What does it cost us when that person leaves to get a new person and to train them to the same level?
Absolutely. There are significant costs when it comes to recruitment and also retention, the knowledge that you've lost and getting that person up to speed, Congresswoman. I do know that there have been a documentation at individual agencies. I'd have to check to see if our agency has done something across government.
I would really encourage that as a way of making sure we have all of the data so that we can come to the right conclusions as we think about workforce issues. So I would encourage you to think about how to make that more of an initiative and how to coordinate that data across agencies. I thank Mr. Chairman and yield back.
Lady yields back. Chair recognizes Mr. Burleson from Missouri for 5 minutes.
Thank you. First, I want to say you look very healthy for someone that was up until 3 a.m. last night. Thank you, Director, for coming. I wanted to say it's clear from this hearing.
Gentleman's time has
He's been here a
expired.
long time, so thank you, Mr.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I now yield 5 minutes to the gentlewoman from Colorado, Ms. Boebert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Director Young, thank you so much for being here today. I just want to start off with a few quick questions. First of all, what is the current national debt?
The current debt is about $24 trillion.
I have about $30 trillion. How much would each American citizen have to pay to cover that debt?
That's not how debts work, so we have not calculated that.
My time, Director. The answer is $91,207 per American citizen. How much does each taxpayer, thank you, how much does each taxpayer owe to cover our current $30 trillion debt, not $24 trillion?
And I'm sorry, I have 22.3, so I'll correct myself downward since we're using different numbers. Again, we don't calculate the debt by person, including my
Reclaiming my
5-month-old.
time, excuse me, Director. The answer is $242,500 per taxpayer in America. Now, you may have been on track with some of these answers if your numbers were correct with the $30 trillion debt that we actually are at right now. But I would have hoped that you would have the correct answers in your position to all of these questions, as the president and this regime really should keep this debt at the forefront of our thinking in proposing a budget. But this budget that was created is proposed to spend another $5.8 trillion this fiscal year and $73 trillion over the next 10 years. And sadly, it's pretty apparent that you're more concerned with continuing to spend trillions of dollars of taxpayer money on liberal wish lists rather than doing anything substantive to rein in wasteful federal government spending. Now, I've said multiple times, the federal government does not have a revenue problem. It has a spending problem. Now, Director Young, Biden likes to say, show me your budget and I'll tell you your values. So let's see what Democrats really value. The word military appears 26 times in this budget, but gender, it's used 43 times in your budget. Equity, well, that's used 75 times. And climate is used 187 times in this budget. And Americans sure do understand what Democrat priorities are and their values. They know that the real cost of these woke policies and so-called values are impacting them. And the bill has come due for these bad Democrat policies. Proposing to spend trillions of dollars on more woke wants, not needs, is absolutely shameful, and really you should be embarrassed to be testifying today and trying to defend this $5.8 trillion budget. Now, during the State of the Union, Joe Biden said that his plan to fight inflation was for businesses to simply lower their costs, not their wages. Director Young, I'm a small business owner, and I can tell you that That's not how it works in the real world. I understand that we use Washington, D.C. math here, but that's not how it works for real small business owners. Meat is up 13%, milk is up almost 12%, electricity is up 9%. Now, as a restaurant owner, how am I supposed to lower my costs if everything that I use is going up? And I certainly wouldn't be able to pay employees higher wages. So with this skyrocketing inflation that's taking place, Madam Director, can you please simply define to me what inflation is?
Sure, the cost of goods are more expensive. It costs more for the same goods than it did last year. The president is very aware of that. That is why he called on Congress to send him legislation.
Reclaiming my time. Thank you, Director. That's not exactly where I was getting at. Let me answer this for you. So Milton Friedman, who won the Nobel Prize in economics, said that inflation comes from too much money being printed in D.C. Specifically, and I quote, he said, inflation is a result of too much money and more rapid increase in the quantity of money than an output. Moreover, in the modern era, the important next step to recognize that today governments control the quantity of money so that as a result, inflation in the United States is made in Washington and nowhere else. So Director Young, in short, inflation comes from Washington, D.C., where the products we use aren't created, but the products we use are made more expensive. Director Young, shamefully, this Biden budget proposes the largest tax increase in American history, and I really think that bears repeating. It is the largest in American history. The Biden regime either has no concept of how inflation is impacting Americans or simply has no concept for Americans who find the cost of gasoline too expensive because, after all, they can't just go buy a Tesla. How about that for Democrat priorities? Thank you, Madam Director.
We often talk, Lauren Boebert, in terms of questioning the level of, I don't think the level of IQ that Lauren Boebert has. And I thought, well, do you know what? We say that she has, well, an IQ that is hovering somewhere between minus something and 0. But in fact, that's a compliment. She's even dumber than you can imagine.
Well, America, the liberal hacks are at it again with their phony Lauren Boebert is so dumb hashtag. Dumb? Really? I'm not the one trying to pass the largest tax increase in our nation's history. I'm not the one claiming a $7 trillion spending splurge will fix the massive inflation we are experiencing here in our country. And I'm certainly not so dumb that I think $7 trillion equals 0. I'm not going to bother entertaining the haters who put this kind of stuff out, but while I have your attention, let's discuss some facts. Joe Biden is a failed president, and our country is crashing before our very eyes. Our supply chains are crashing. Ships are being held off ports, and the White House is now admitting that it's going to affect your Christmas. The Democrats in Congress are fighting over a $7 trillion spending spree while discussing how they want to monitor every American citizen's bank transaction over $600. Kamala, who is apparently still vice president, is busy filming skits with paid child actors since she's not allowed to do any of the adult work. Rather than attack me, you all need to be looking into your own president. I'm doing my best to fix all this, but we certainly need to retake Congress if we are going to get the job done. I made a promise to the liberal haters months ago. Every time they tried to make some nasty hashtag about me, well, get it trending, and I'll flip it on its head and claim a victory for freedom-loving patriots.
This is Boebert from Colorado for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Katzen, should bureaucrats implement rules and regulations that are not delegated by Congress?
It's not the bureaucrats that do it. It would be an agency.
The bureaucrats working in the agencies, should they be in charge of enforcing rules and regulations not delegated to them by Congress?
No, and that does not occur.
Well, Ms. Katzen, you stated while some elected officials accuse the agencies of running amok, no agency is a free agent, and they can only do which Congress has delegated them.
Correct.
Now, I agree with that. However, we see in agencies all the time rules and regulations that are enforced on the American people that were not delegated to them by Congress. For instance, just in the last 5 years, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms has changed its long-standing positions on firearm products 3 times through administrative fiat. Would you agree with that process in the ATF?
I have no quarrel with what the ATF has done, because in each
But you said here that they can only
do
do which Congress has delegated to them. So now these changes have resulted in products that were previously classified as lawful by the ATF. Now they're being considered illegal or regulated under the National Firearms Act. And more recently, we've seen with the ATF's rule to categorize pistol braces, these stabilizing braces, as heavily regulated short-barreled rifles, essentially making gun owners nearly obtaining maybe 40 million firearms with stabilizing braces, criminals overnight, felons even. And so, Ms. Katzen, would you say that this is an abuse of that separation of power? Because that rule is not something that Congress has delegated, but the ATF has taken it upon itself to regulate this rule that they created to make millions of Americans felons.
With respect, I was trying to answer your question before you interrupted me to say that the ATF had, in each of these instances, sufficient statutory authority from Congress, and that any challenges to that...
Ms. Katzen, it is my time. So Congress never authorized the ATF to ban pistol braces. Congress never authorized the ATF to do that, to make millions of Americans felons overnight. And so I would go back to your statement that you said in your testimony that these agencies are not free agencies, and they can only do which Congress has delegated to them to do.
Congress is not
Ms. Katzen,
specific. Excuse me.
Thank you. My time. No, ma'am. It's my time. Thank you.
Oh, I'm
Ms.
sorry.
Katzen,
So you are not
your
interested in my views.
It is my time. Thank you.
I'm
In your
sorry you're not
testimony,
interested in my
you
views.
stated Congress delegates, but then some officials are quick to condemn the agencies for doing what they are told to do, carrying out the law. Well, last year, the Biden administration's EPA and the Army Corps of Engineers attempted to regulate wetlands and ditches under the Clean Water Act. That's clearly not the intent of the Clean Water Act. The intent of the Clean Water Act was to manage major federal navigable waters. So now this rule was recently upended by the Supreme Court's recent decision. Now, would you agree that the Biden administration has a pattern of purposefully misinterpreting the law in order to carry out their political agenda?
No, ma'am. I think, in fact, that the law keeps changing, and the Supreme Court had a very hard time
I haven't seen that law change
figure out...
here in Congress. So this was the intent of the Clean Water Act, and I have not seen that change. So I would say that this is another example of the Biden administration and the EPA misinterpreting the law to carry out their own political agenda. Now, Ms. Katzen, when discussing regulations made by the Biden administration in your testimony, you also state, are these regulations detrimental to our well-being? Hardly. Are they tying us up in red tape? Certainly not. Well, going back to WOTUS and the Sackett family, who this Clean Water Act decision impacted, the family was threatened with fines of $10,000 per day, had their property misclassified as a wetland, and were prevented from building their family home. It may not be a $2.5 million home like yours, but that sounds like a lot of red tape to me.
Excuse me.
Do you disagree?
I really take that as a personal
do you
assumption.
disagree?
My home.
Do you disagree that this was an overreach?
I disagree that
Ms.
you're
Katzen, my time
casting
has expired.
aspersions on
Mr. Chairman,
me
I
or
yield.
my...
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, could we just ask all of our good members to respect the civility and decorum and the integrity of the witnesses who've come forward at their own expense to testify before us today? An insult is not a substitute for an argument. Yield back to you.
The chair would advise the members to adhere to the House standard of decorum and procedure. Ms. Crockett, if